You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Ross. I represent the southernmost district in the state of Florida, Florida Keys. The Everglades is a huge part of my district. And as you probably know, the Everglades are crucial for all of Florida. The health of the Everglades is essential for our economy, for our health, and for our wildlife. The Everglades also naturally filters out toxins and harmful nutrients like phosphorus. Higher levels of these pollutants lead to toxic algal blooms, countless dead fish, and red tides. The Everglades, clean water from the Everglades also provides clean drinking water for more than 8 million Floridians alone. Now, the Florida delegation has been working closely together on a bipartisan basis to push forward Everglades restoration. We recognize the importance of these wetlands, and it seems that now the administration, after having adjusted its budget request for Everglades restoration to the full $200 million, which I requested, it's beginning to recognize their importance too. But what's very difficult to understand is that the administration's actions are in conflict with each other. On the one hand, it says that it wants to fund Everglades restoration, and then on the other hand, it's working to rewrite regulations to make those protections even weaker for our water in Florida. So either the Trump administration and the EPA care about Florida or they don't. So under your position, and I quote this, under cooperative federalism, those waters not covered by the Federal Clean Water Act would be addressed by the individual states. We saw what happened back in 2016 under the previous governor, his administration. What they did was the Florida Department of Environmental Protection updated its regulations to permit more toxic chemicals to come into the water. And I have some images that I would like for you to take a look at. I don't know, have you seen the toxic algal blooms? This is 2 years after the governor actually ease the regulations permitting more toxic chemicals to be released into the water. And I heard you talking about economic impact. We had to close several businesses along both the east and the west coast of Florida. 15 people ended up in the emergency room. We saw images of thousands of dead fish, dead manatee, dead dolphins. We continue to work on this issue. So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that you want to leave it up to the states to regulate their own waters, right? Is that correct?
Actually, both federal and state regulation, depending on the
both federal
water.
and state. Can I ask you what you are currently doing? How are you working closely with the Army Corps into how you regulate those toxins that are coming into Lake Okeechobee that have caused these green-blue algal blooms?
Yeah, actually, so we are working very closely with the Army Corps of Engineers. I've talked to Artie James and Mr. Fisher specifically about this, working in partnership. Our teams have been down actually touring Lake Okeechobee with NOAA balancing.
When was that, Mr. Ross?
Earlier this year. I sent my principal deputy down to actually take a tour of Lake Okeechobee.
And have you formed a plan of action here?
We're actually working, well, there are a couple of things that we're doing. One, we're working with the state and working with the Corps to try to figure out the lake levels associated with, how do you actually grapple with the lake levels and discharges? There's a plan in place and working with the Department of Agriculture.
And what about regulating the pollutants that are coming into the lake?
Well, so some of that is non-point source pollution that's outside the scope of the Clean Water Act, but in that, I'm actually spending a lot of time and energy on excess nutrients in surface water. It's one of our, we have our regulatory tools and total maximum daily loads and all those enforcement tools, but we also need to do a better job tapping into our creative market-based mechanisms. And so over the course of this year, I've developed a policy to incentivize market-based mechanisms. If you could provide that plan for me, I would really appreciate it. I'm almost out of time.
I'd be happy to. One more question that I had for you. In South Florida, we have wet and dry season, as you're aware, and during some dry seasons, which of course fluctuate year by year, significant portions of the Everglades dry up. And I'm deeply concerned that the administration's actions will leave much of the Everglades without the Clean Water Act protections. Can you assure me today that, to me and my Florida colleagues, that any rule that the administration implements as it pertains to the Clean Water Act will ensure that the Everglades and its watershed will receive full Clean Water Act protections despite dry areas during dry seasons?
So my understanding is the Florida Everglades are the wetlands that would remain subject to our jurisdiction and our proposed rule.
So can you make that assurance to me today?
Well, holistically, it's a large landscape down there, and so if there are individual pockets.
So is that a no? You can't
It
do
is,
that
it is a
today.
yes qualified by I can't speak to every single wetland down in Florida. But the other thing I want to mention is Florida has a really remarkable wetlands protection program, and so they
You mean
regulate
the
wetlands.
state, which,
the
I mean,
state
you
of
can
Florida
see,
has a
you
more.
can see what happens when we leave it up to the state. Now, so is the EPA under the Trump administration going to open up the Everglades for further development and pollution, if you're not willing to make that commitment to me today?
I have no plans to open up the Everglades for further development, but that really is a local and state issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mucarsel-Powell. Mr. Palmer, you have the floor.